begin the evening's proceedings with Sai Deepak. We have arranged a live singing program for the audience gathered here today. I am here to request you all to support the young talented artists. I request Sumukh Acharya on the sitar, Lokesh Sampige on the flute, and Sridhar Prabhu on the tabla, who are here to entertain you with their lively music for the evening today. I request all the audience to join your hands together once again and welcome the artists on stage for their live performance for the evening. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So, we'll be starting with a rag Yaman. So, we'll play something, we'll be performing something on a classical bass, light music. So, hope you all enjoy this. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. So that was Rag Yaman. So moving on to the next composition, it's based on Rag Desh with a similar context, with slightly. We'll try to play a bhajan based on Rag Desh. So hope you like it.
ಮಾತೆರೆಗ್ಲ ಸೊಲ್ಮೆಲು ಇಂದಿನ ಸಭಾ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ಇನ್ನು ಕೆಲವೇ ಕ್ಷಣಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಆರಂಭವಾಗಲಿದೆ. ನಮ್ಮ ಮುಖ್ಯ ಅತಿಥಿಗಳಾದ ಸಾಯ್ ದೀಪಕ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಇಂದಿನ ಸಂಭಾಷಣೆಗಳು ಅರ್ಥವಾಗಲು ಅನುಕೂಲಕರವಾಗಿರಲೆಂದು ನಮ್ಮ ಇಂದಿನ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮವನ್ನು ಆಂಗ್ಲ ಭಾಷೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಿರೂಪಿಸುತ್ತಿದ್ದೇವೆ. ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ನಿಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರ ಸಮಿತಿ ಇದೆ ಎಂದು ಭಾವಿಸುತ್ತೇವೆ. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Citizens Council Mangaluru chapter, it is my honor and privilege to welcome you all to this much anticipated session on civilization, constitution, and the myth of secularism with our distinguished guest, Sai Deepak. Before we officially begin the evening's proceedings, let us take a moment to express our heartfelt gratitude to the incredible artists who graced us with their soulful performance. On the sitar, Sumukh Acharya. On the flute, Lokesh Sampige. On the tabla, Shridat Prabhu. Their artistry has truly set a captivating tone for the evening. I am Raksha Bhatt, and it's my pleasure to serve as your Master of Ceremonies for today's event. Let's dive into an evening of engaging discourse and enlightenment. Vidya vivadaya dhanam madaya shakti paresham paripeedanaya khalasya sadhi viparitametata jnanaya danaya cha rakshanaya. For the wicked, knowledge leads to arguments, wealth leads to arrogance, and power leads to oppression. But for the virtuous, knowledge is used for wisdom, wealth for generosity, and power for protection. This shloka beautifully conveys that true knowledge, when paired with conviction and virtue, has the power to positively transform the world. A sentiment that perfectly resonates with our esteemed guest for today, J. Sai Deepak, a custodian of the Constitution and a staunch advocate of India's civilizational identity. His presence enriches our gathering. It is also our immense honor to welcome Honorable Justice P. Krishna Bhatt to this evening's event. Hailing from the quaint village of Vittal Padnur in Dakshina Kannada, Justice Bhatt's remarkable journey from humble beginnings to a distinguished legal career is an inspiration to all. After completing his law degree from the prestigious Banaras Hindu University, he began practicing in Mangalore and went on to serve as a district and sessions judge. His exemplary service culminated in his tenure as a revered judge of the Karnataka High Court. Even after retiring in 2022, Justice Bhatt continues to shape the legal landscapes as an honorary professor at Manipal Law School, Bengaluru. Sir, your unwavering commitment to justice and profound wisdom are invaluable, and we are truly privileged to have you with us today. May I kindly request the Vice President of the Citizens Council, Shri Vasudev Kamath, to graciously escort our esteemed guests to the stage. Prayer not only sanctifies the event, but also unties our hearts and minds, setting the stage for wisdom, grace, and positivity to guide us throughout. It reminds us of the divine presence that inspires and strengthens us in all our endeavors. With this in mind, I now invite Srimati Akshata Shanai to lead us in the prayer song. May I kindly request everyone in the audience to rise and join in this moment of devotion and reverence.
Shuklan Baradharam Vishnum Shashivarnam Chaturbhujam प्रसन्नवदनं ध्यायेत् सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्री Gurave Namaha.
Thank you, Srimati Akshata Shanai. To mark the auspicious beginning of this evening, I warmly invite our distinguished guests, J. Sai Deepak, Honorable Justice P. Krishna Bhatt, and Shri Vasudev Kamath, along with the respected committee members of the Citizens' Council, to grace the stage and light the ceremonial lamp. Shubham karoti kalyanam, arogyam dhana sampada, shatru buddhi vinashaya, deepat jyotir namostute. May the light of the lamp bring auspiciousness, good health, and prosperity. May it destroy the intellect of enemies. I bow to the light of the lamp. It is now my pleasure to invite Shri Abhijit Hegde to the stage. Shri Abhijit Hegde will provide us with an introduction to the Citizens' Council and officially extend a warm welcome to everyone present here today. Please join me in welcoming him.
Namaste, distinguished guests, and all the spirited citizens gathered here today. It is with great enthusiasm and honor that I welcome you to this exceptional evening organized by the Citizens' Council, Mangalore chapter. We are here to discuss one of the most pressing and thought-provoking topics of our time: civilization, constitution, and the myth of secularism. This evening promises to be more than just a gathering. It is a meeting of minds and ideas, a platform to reflect upon, challenge, and grow in our understanding of these significant themes. I extend my heartfelt welcome to our chief guest and keynote speaker, Shri J. Sai Deepak ji, senior advocate at the Supreme Court of India and Delhi High Court, a respected voice in legal and intellectual circles. Sir, your profound insights and dedication to upholding India's civilizational ethos inspires us all, and we are grateful for your presence here today, sir. We are also deeply honored to have Shri Justice Krishna Bhatt ji with us this evening. Your experience and guidance serve as a beacon for this gathering, and your support has enriched the spirit of today's program. About Citizens' Council, since its inception in 2013, the Council has passionately worked towards fostering informed dialogue on issues of national and civic importance. We have organized numerous impactful programs that have stimulated discussions on diverse subjects, from governance to economics, history to contemporary policy, and civilizational values to societal responsibilities. Through our efforts, we aim to inspire citizens to take an active role in shaping the future of our city and nation. This evening's program is a reflection of our ongoing commitment to creating spaces where ideas meet action and discussions lead to transformation. Once again, I thank each one of you for joining this evening. Your presence here is a testament to your commitment to understanding and contributing to our nation's growth and identity. Let us make this evening not just an event, but an experience, one that inspires us to think, question, and act for the betterment of our society. With that, I warmly welcome you all to this enlightening session. Thank you.
Thank you, Shri Abhijit Hegde. The audience has been eagerly anticipating the words of J. Sai Deepak, a true thought leader and an influential voice whose work has already garnered recognition across the globe. His profound impact in shaping public discourse and advocating for justice has made him a prominent figure in today's intellectual landscape. However, to delve deeper into his inspiring journey and contributions, I now invite Shri Vasudev Kamath to the stage to formally introduce our distinguished guest. Please join me in welcoming Vasudev Kamath.
Good evening, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Together, we gather to explore the remarkable journey of a man who has risen as a beacon of intellectual rigor, cultural rootedness, and unwavering commitment to justice. J. Sai Deepak, a senior advocate at the Supreme Court of India and Delhi High Court. His journey from being a mechanical engineer to a top-tier advocate and an acclaimed author is nothing short of inspiring. A graduate of IIT Kharagpur's Rajiv Gandhi School of Intellectual Property Law, he blends technical precision with intellectual depth, creating a unique and refreshing approach to the study of law and governance ethics. He has appeared in some of India's most landmark cases, such as the defense of religious freedom in the Sabarimala temple case and the preservation of cultural rights in the Padmanabha Swami temple case. Through these cases, he has demonstrated his dedication to balancing India's civilizational values with its constitutional framework. As an author, his books, India, that is Bharat, and India, Bharat, and Pakistan have redefined the national discourse, offering a fresh perspective on decolonization, governance, and India's post-colonial realities. Today, Shri Sai Deepak will speak on a subject of immense importance: the intersection of India's civilization and its constitution, and the often misunderstood concept of secularism. His talk will challenge us to rethink what it means to live in a secular democracy and how India's civilizational identity can coexist with its modern aspirations. This session is not just an opportunity to listen, but to engage, to explore new ideas, challenge myths, and live with a better understanding of our role as citizens of this great nation. Ladies and gentlemen, let us open our minds and hearts to the wisdom and clarity that Shri Sai Deepak brings to the table. I'm confident that this evening will leave each of us enriched, enlightened, and inspired. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Shri J. Sai Deepak.
Namaskara. Good evening, and thanks to the Citizens Council of Mangaluru for giving me an opportunity to engage with the audience. First of all, I'd like to thank Shri Bhatt for having taken the pains, for following after me for close to 6 months, or in fact over a year, to somehow get me to speak here. Not that he had to do it, it just so happens that my schedule has been fairly chock-a-block with other commitments, but otherwise, considering the beauty of this place, there's no need for any other incentive for me to come here. I've come here often on the way to Sringeri and other places. When I got off the flight today, one of the first questions that popped in my head, what is it that you guys eat that all of you are so good looking? That's a serious question, and I'm really interested in understanding what is the genetics of this place, what makes everyone so good looking, regardless of the gender. And I think this is one of those parts of Bharat which has been blessed with abundance in every possible form, whether it's culture, nature, and people in terms of human resources. So I'm happy to be here. This topic is something I think I've done to death on multiple occasions. So I was thinking, how do I actually present something different here? And how do I make it still relevant to the challenges that we face as a society? So just a bit of a correction based on the introduction, no factual correction. Usually what happens is social media has the tendency to magnify people beyond their actual worth, and also glorify them. Perhaps, I don't know, maybe there's a certain sense of hype surrounding individuals once they appear on the screen. One, I must confess, I have no interest in the pursuit of any civilizational cause, nor am I interested in pursuing anything which takes me away from my professional commitments. Let me be very clear about this. When they were actually putting together the introduction, 2 or 3 words that I preempted even before they could think of it was the word activist, was the word civilizational warrior, and something else, dharmic warrior or whatever it is. I said, none of those words shall be used. The sole identity that I've subscribed to, at least as an individual from a professional perspective, is that of a lawyer. I will live as one and die as one and nothing more. I have no other aspirations. The reason why this is important is that if the message has to be relatable to the audience, then the person must be equally relatable to the audience. It makes very little sense to put someone on a pedestal and then hope that the message of that person will relate or resonate with the audience. Perhaps there is a myth going around that I have committed myself full-time to the cause of service of Dharma. Not one bit. It's less than 15% of my time allocation in terms of my professional commitments, family commitments, and then whatever remains goes here. But the model that I'm trying to perhaps push is that it is equally possible for working professionals to take some time out in the service of this cause. If I were to ask people to jump into this cause full time, I don't think I'll find even 5% success. Nobody is going to do it. Everybody has their own jobs, everybody has their own responsibilities, they have bills to pay, they have EMIs to address. So where is the question of asking people to jump into this cause full time? That's not going to happen. So the model that I think that works, at least for the here and the now, let's see what happens in the future, is telling people to strike a balance between both their commitments, their familial commitments and their societal or religious commitments, in whichever order of priority they see it. So my interest in taking up this cause has been extremely selfish. Very, very selfish in the sense that I don't wish to walk out into a society, or at least send my child into one, where the sporting of Hindu symbols becomes the subject of ridicule or becomes the target of attacks, either in the name of secularism or in the name of constitutional morality, where our civilizational identities take a backseat. So if anything, my motive or motivation behind getting into this Agnikund, so to speak, is only because I am trying to create a safe future for my own family. That's it. Beyond that, there is no incentive here. The fact that there is an incidental benefit for the society is, as I said, incidental. It's a second order effect. It's not the primary intended effect. But Since I'm trying to address the larger optics of it, or the larger atmospherics of it, obviously the target of that message happens to be the society, but the intended beneficiary happens to be my family. I'm very clear about it. If I do not present this model, what will happen is maybe 15-20 people will at best join this so-called ongoing movement. There won't be any stakeholdership or participation from the rest of the society. And the same set of talking heads will go to different platforms. We'll get visibility. Our books will sell. A couple of selfies here, a couple of selfies there. Instagram likes will increase. And then a few shorts and reels on YouTube will do the rounds. But would it have achieved the intended effect of widening the participation of the general Hindu society from its Kumbhakarna slumber into the actual issues that stare us when it comes to our existence and civilizational, let's say, survival? I would always say that Hindus have a fairly huge problem of deification and glorification before performance is achieved. They're eager to glorify and celebrate people before they have proved themselves on the anvils of actions, on the anvils of delivery, on the anvils of actual concrete outcomes. So I would request you to not make that mistake, either on the policy front or the cultural front, and especially on the political front. Don't make that mistake. Don't deify and glorify people. Make sure that they deliver the goods that they've been voted for. That would be my single biggest message before I start on this topic. Otherwise, what's going to happen is this will become, and one of the reasons I've taken a step back from public engagements, or even lit fests for that matter, is that the same set of faces are going everywhere. And I don't wish to join those proceedings unless and until I know that it's not just a question of relevance, but a question of impact. It must have an impact and not just a question of individual relevance. So maybe there is a bit of acerbic honesty in this. I would request you to digest it, because I think we are at a certain point in our history where if we don't address these issues with withering honesty, then this din and the noise that is created around individuals will drown the actual challenges that we are beset with. The problems are so large and are so huge that no single individual has the ability to address it on his or her own. It is going to require collective participation. It is going to require collective contribution. And therefore, the model, a working model of striking a balance between your professional regular lives and your ability to contribute to dharma as well. Coming to the topic, one of the reasons I've been speaking, writing on the subject extensively is thanks to my own personal experience of trying to project and present certain causes before constitutional fora such as the Supreme Court on subjects and institutions which are close to my heart. So most people don't know as to what I do in terms of practice. Let me just say that so that you know why this transition has happened. I began as an engineer turned lawyer, and my primary area of practice is actually intellectual property law and competition law. Even if I say so myself, I have some degree of expertise over the last 15 years. I've been the advisor to multiple governments on implementation of IP policies. I've also represented Bharat in trade negotiations with the United States. I've done all of that. So why did I make the jump to Constitution at all in the first place? So when I joined law school, Constitution was the actual goal. But you see, Constitution doesn't pay bills. It's a very poor area of practice. It's not exactly a place thriving with a lot of money. And activism had no interest. I come from a low middle class family. I was very interested in settling my student loans and quickly climbing the social ladder. That was my very clear incentive. So I said, let me spend some time pursuing Lakshmi in the hope that I get to pursue Saraswati after that. And the idea was that I split, let's say, my practice areas in such a way that my money comes from the Delhi High Court and my passion is vetted and satisfied in the Supreme Court on the constitutional front. That's how I have largely divided it. So a lot of times what happens is, as a consequence of all these social media engagements or public engagements, people somehow get the distinct impression that I'm going around asking people to contribute funds to my cause. I don't need money from anyone. I have no interest in soliciting funds whatsoever. You want to contribute to your local Goshala, to your Veda Patashala, for orphanages here, to schools here. Those have been Hindu priorities traditionally, and those should continue to be Hindu priorities for eternity. As far as my own transition is concerned, I'll blend it with the topic so you know why this has been so personal for me. 2016, that is from 2009 to 2016, I was part of a law firm. I rose to become the youngest associate partner in March 2015, by which time I had developed a fair reputation as someone who could argue in court without the need for a senior. By which time my opposing counsels had said, if you were not part of a firm, we'd start engaging you for arguments. So by 2016 is when I decided to quit and go independent. Now, as long as you're part of another outfit, it's very difficult for you to take positions because the organization will pay the price for your positions. And particularly if they happen to be politically incorrect positions and you're fairly vocal about it, they may or may not agree. But without blaming them for anything, the fact of the matter is I decided to prove myself exclusively on the anvils of professional commitments for the first 7 years. People should know me for my professional competence before they know me for my opinions, was my approach to it. Because every Tom, Dick and Harry can have an opinion, so what? Why should people hear you? Why should people pay attention to what you're saying? They will listen to you provided you have done something, you have something to show for. And therefore the strategy, very clear strategy, at least a calculated one, was establish yourself and then you start talking on the subject. So for close to 7 years, I spent my time keeping my mouth shut, keeping my head down, proving myself exclusively as a competent commercial litigator in the Delhi High Court. 2016 June is when I went independent as an independent arguing counsel, which is in the mold of a barrister, wherein you don't interact with the client. Your sole job is to argue in court. You don't file, you don't draft, you just argue. So your clients are other lawyers who want you to argue, and the actual client is the client of that lawyer. So the client is in a relationship with the solicitor, who is the one who prepares the matter. The solicitor engages the barrister to argue in court. So I happen to be in the arguing mold. So that's the practice model that I jumped to, because by then I'd already established a reputation as someone who could fairly argue in court. Around that time, the Sabarimala case was raging before a 3-judge bench. And the 3-judge bench was asking itself whether this matter is serious enough for it to be referred to a 5-judge bench. And therefore arguments were going on, I think, between October 2016 and February 2017 before the 3-judge bench. There was one organization called People for Dharma, which was looking for lawyers who could take up their cause pro bono. Now, they didn't have access to me, I didn't have access to them. Neither of us knew of the other's existence. Someone on social media, later that person met me and revealed his identity, put out a message to them, a public tweet in fact, that if you're looking for someone who will fight this cause passionately, regardless of any commercial incentive, go to this guy because he's serious about these things. Now, I don't know how that person had read this about me from a distance, but that's how they said it. That's how the opportunity landed on my table. And when the opportunity landed on my table, I realized, with growing awareness and concern, that Bharat had achieved a certain unfortunate stage where all the institutions that inform its identity and civilization will now have to prove their worth before constitutional courts as to how their practices are constitutional. Religious practices and traditions that have survived and that have existed for thousands of years will now be tested on the anvils of the Constitution in front of an Anglophone audience. And traditional practices will now have to be conveyed and packaged in English for them to understand whether it is constitutional or not. Now remember, all these people, just like us, at least most of us, are people who have gone through an English education system, with or without any traditional exposure to our customs and traditions. Or even if there is exposure, there is a decent chance that they look down upon those traditions. So this is not a primary audience of children in schools, it's not a secondary audience of people in colleges, it's a tertiary audience with a lived experience of constantly having looked down upon their culture for 30 years or 40 years. And you're trying to convince them in a span of a week or so that this practice is not misogynistic, that this practice is perfectly valid. Ask yourself a simple question. Somebody brings their life experience to their jobs, and you're hoping to argue against their life experience and their worldview in a span of a few hours, trying to convince them as to why this practice must continue. Genuinely speaking, I didn't think we had any hopes of success. No hopes of success. You can't even convince children today of your customs. How can you hope to convince adults with set egos and set patterns of thinking who occupy those positions which obviously give them a certain degree of importance? There is no incentive for them to be convinced otherwise, to be persuaded otherwise. But why was the representation still necessary? The representation was necessary because if you don't vocally express your point of view, it is as good as that point of view not existing. People will therefore say, there is no alternative point of view. There is no alternative opinion. So sometimes, even if it happens to be a losing battle at the outset, at least in round one, your job is to continue hitting and kicking the door to try and pry that door open for your point of view. So knowing fully well that the odds were stacked against us, and when I mean we, it's a huge team of, let's say, a variety of lawyers. Perhaps I was the youngest to argue in that particular matter. Everyone put their best foot forward. If you had legends like Mr. Satish Parasaran, including Dr. Singhvi was arguing from this side, for God's sakes. Dr. Singhvi argued for the Travancore Devaswam board, defending the tradition on behalf of the temple in defense of the practice. A host of voices, some of the most stellar voices produced by the Indian legal fraternity, did argue from this side and still managed to come out only with a 4-1 verdict, one opinion in your favor, 4 against you. And the one person to deliver a verdict in your favor happened to be a lady in the cause which is supposed to be about women. The dissenting opinion in favor of the tradition came from a lady. And the men were saviors of women in that cause. This is unfortunately how contemporary feminism works, where men become more feminist than women themselves. And in the process, what happened was, there was a moment of churn created. Allow me to say this, everything that has happened since 2018, especially since the birth of the Sabarimala movement, has only led to a rising Hindu consciousness. Before 2018, not many people had heard the words Naishtika Brahmacharya. People in the north of Vindhyas, several parts of that country had no knowledge of this particular temple, despite Russians, Argentinians and Brazilians coming to this temple with proper Diksha. Any number of videos put out by foreigners basically saying, we understand this, why can't you Hindus and Indians understand it? That was the extent of the problem. But sometimes I think these challenges are moments of learning and moments of churn, because they pry open the conversation from a confined box, and the entire Pandora's box is opened. Gender, jati, temple, everything comes out. And then people start thinking, okay, what do we actually know about this particular subject for us to have such strong opinions on? People started revisiting. From there, in 2018, when the first negative verdict came out, so many people who had written off Keralites and Malayalis as communists who were irredeemable and incorrigible, the women of Kerala took out processions in defense of the temple, thereby establishing that political choices and religious beliefs need not necessarily coincide. They could be different. And that possibility was out for people to see. So the educated women of the most literate state of the country came out on the streets protesting against a verdict which was apparently meant to liberate women in defense of a practice that was apparently misogynistic. Look at the irony of it. And they said, we know this practice better than you think we do. You don't need to come and save us. We can defend ourselves. There are better things for you to defend us against, not this. If at all you would really wish to intervene and protect us, there are other serious issues. This is luxury litigation. People who are utterly jobless or whose only job is to take pot shots at Hindu institutions are the ones who are behind it, and who constantly think that Hindu institutions must be in a perpetual mode of reform and everything that they know and practice for the last 1,000 years must be junked and discarded. That seems to be the motive behind it. So it was a moment of learning because it opened my eyes to how little I knew about an institution of which I thought I knew some. What is the meaning of this practice? How is it supposed to be observed? All the myths associated with the Sabarimala Diksha I had to unlearn. And I was put in touch with a brilliant set of people who were vastly more qualified than I am, and I was, or I will be ever, on the subject of dharma, who decided to download all their knowledge upon me, giving me the opportunity to present this before a court of law. Perhaps what I'm trying to do is to say that it was not a solo act. I just happened to be a glorified articulator and messenger of their opinions and their points of view before the highest forum of the land. And the credit must go to all those people who were behind the scenes. I also walked away with the glory partly because of social media representation, and the fact of the matter is a lot of Ayyappa Diksha, Bhaktas, withstood lathi blows on the ground. I didn't have to face a single lathi blow. Right? 2, my star argument of the deity's rights came from a boy younger than I and a non-lawyer. His name is Tarun Daga. He was part of the team. He basically said, if women have rights, doesn't the deity have rights? That was the seed of the argument. And I then thought about it. So the strength of a lawyer need not be that he is the origin of an idea. He must just be open to ideas, and then he must know how to build an argument out of it and to develop that argument further. That's what happened. From there I went to the next experience, which was the Padmanabha Swami temple case, where I happened to represent the chief tantri of the temple. And then I realized what kind of a relationship did princely states of Bharat have with their deities. Mysore, Chamundeshwari; Jagannath, therefore the Gajapati of Odisha; Mewad, Eklingji; then Cochin, I think Purnatraisha. So every princely state seems to have its own deity, and every princely family, when it negotiated its accession with the Indian state, primarily was saying, take everything else away, but leave our rights with respect to our deities intact. Because this is our hereditary institution. If you break this relationship, there will be real consequences for us. The fear of karmic consequences was very, very real for them. And so if you go through the negotiations, I think the right-hand man of Vallabhbhai Patel, who wrote a book on the integration of states and who released the white paper on how integration must happen, captures it brilliantly as to how these parties negotiated with the Indian state. And then I said, okay, if 90% of the princely states were Hindu princely states, and the basis of the partition was a division between Hindu princely states and Muslim princely states, how did Hindu princely states come together to come out with a non-Hindu Bharat? How is that possible? So each of the parts have very clear religious allegiance. But apparently the unit that they form is a secular unit which has no religious identity at all. Is this what they negotiated for? How does this even work? That explains the absence of the word secularism partly in the original constitution. Because they were all participants and stakeholders to how the constitution will be framed, because it would have a bearing on their surviving rights after the accession, including the religious rights. How do you call this a secular constitution if it has a specific provision for protection of the cow? if it has a specific article, Article 295A, under which the Union of India from the Consolidated Fund of India continues to pay an annual rent to the Padmanabha Swami temple for the lands that it has taken from the temple. So temple payment is made out from an apparently secular constitution. How do you explain this? Which is why I believe it's important for us to understand the entry of secularism into the Indian constitution very, very clearly. For all practical purposes, it was pushed and forced into the draft, or rather into the body of the document, only during the emergency. So those who wish to bat for the constitution and its integrity and whatnot have a lot to answer for, because this concept and this principle was inserted in the constitution during the most unconstitutional period of Bharat, when for all practical purposes all checks and balances were in a state of animated suspension. So how do you then constantly bat for secularism? That is a question of fact, that is a question of history that needs a very clear answer. Even the most hardcore of Hindu voices somehow are wedded to the concept of secularism without realizing what its origins are and its devastating, catastrophic effect on the civilization as a whole. Now, how do we understand secularism in Bharat? It says, the state has no religious identity. The state shall maintain an equidistance from all religions and all faiths. And the state shall never use its funds, which are supposed to be secular funds, for the promotion of any particular faith or any institution of any particular faith. In your lived experience, has Bharat done any of these? The answer is a no. So either the definition of secularism in this country is a khichdi, or we are fundamentally a hypocritical state. These are only two possible conclusions that I can come out with. Now, the consequence of insertion of secularism in the context of Bharat has been a large-scale, wholesale brainwashing of the entire population, which has the effect of telling the population that it shall never have the right to proudly wear the civilizational identity of this country on its sleeve. I've said this before, I'll say it again. Secularism is a political evangelical tool whose job is to sever your roots between you and your past, as a state, as a society, as a country. What they will do is that it's a river called secularism. They'll take you to that river, ask you to dunk in that river, and then your baptism is done. And thanks to that baptism, you're now secular Hindus. Morons who are oxymorons, or oxymorons who are morons. So, according to me, secularism is that particular water body to which we are all taken to convert and come out with a lens which is completely brainwashed. What is the origin of this word? What is the origin of this concept? I've written about this, but before me, stalwarts have written about this extensively. So whatever they've written, I'll just summarize it in 15 minutes so that you have a clear picture. Around the 12th or the 13th century in Europe, long ago, not so long ago, whenever long ago, the point is around 12th century, when there was only one denomination of the church, which is Catholicism in Europe, the relationship between the church and the rulers was an extremely tense relationship. Because the church effectively is based on the doctrine that human existence is divided into two kingdoms, kingdom of the earth and kingdom of heaven. The church has monopoly over kingdom of heaven. Rulers are allowed to rule the kingdom of earth. But since earth is subservient to heaven, the ruler is subservient to the church. Therefore, a tussle goes on for close to 3 to 4 centuries between the church and Christian rulers, not just rulers, Christian rulers. During this entire period, what happens is that kings try to take over the property of the church to control its ability to interfere with administration. Hid money as much as possible so that the church's ability to comment on administration comes down, so that the power that they wield over society comes down. And then the church also does a few things wherein apologies, confessions are sold for money. So a general, let's say, frustration or angst against the church as an institution starts building in European society. That gradually leads to the Reformation movement with Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King Jr., but Martin Luther, who is the founder of the Lutheran brand of denomination of Christians, and who are mostly, if you see Lutheran denomination, you'll find it in Germany for God knows for what reason. So he begins a movement of Reformation where he challenges the monopoly of the church. When he starts challenging the monopoly of the church, he then comes out with a protest against Catholicism, which results in the Protestant movement. A protest against the manner in which the Catholic Church operates, controls all religious aspects, and basically says you shall not have access to salvation unless and until you go through the church, specifically the Catholic Church. He tries to break that monopoly of the Catholic Church on salvation and all other aspects of religious behavior as well as non-religious behavior. That Reformation movement results in several Christian states of Europe choosing sides, some choosing the Catholic Church's side and some choosing the Protestant side. Results in a huge fight, multiple treaties, and the final treaty is what we know as the Treaty of Westphalia. So the Treaty of Westphalia was not some kind of a political treaty, it was fundamentally a religious treaty wherein the monopoly of the Catholic Church over Christianity was completely broken. And for the first time, the treaty recognized that Christianity shall henceforth have two denominations, Catholicism and Protestantism. Now, once you do this, the concept of separation of the church and the state comes from that treaty, which is to say, the Catholic Church will not interfere with the rights of individual European rulers to decide whether they want to be parts of Catholic Christianity or Protestant Christianity. So therefore, separation of the church from the state is basically, it still retains the Christian character. It only says the Catholic Church will not tell us whether we should be Catholics or Protestants. And the ruler of each European state will have the power to decide whether he wants to be on the Catholic side or on the Protestant side. But the concept of secularism in Europe never meant give up Christianity. That the state shall have no identity. The state shall have a Christian identity, the ruler shall be a Christian. The only difference is whether he would be a Catholic Christian or a Protestant was the distinction. Compare that with what we are being told about secularism in Bharat. European secularism translates to retention of the Christian identity. It only says you will remain equidistant from denominations. Why? If you happen to have a Protestant minority population in a Catholic majority state, then there must be safeguards to protect the interest of those denominational minorities. And therefore, the majority-minority concept in terms of protection of the rights of the minority is to be traced to that particular situation where minority Protestants had to protect themselves against majority Catholics and vice versa. However, the existence of a minority Catholic in a Protestant majority state would not require the state to give up its Protestant majoritarian identity and vice versa. So they were entitled to have their own identities. And I'll give you a simple comparison. Think of it as fights, let's say a fight between Vaishnavites and Shaivites. If the king happened to be a Shaivite and you had a minority Vaishnavite population, he would have to safeguard their rights, but that doesn't mean he would have to give up his own Shaivite affiliation. And he would still be a Hindu king, but with a Shaivite identity, who basically says, I will employ laws in such a way that they're equidistant from both sects. This is not dharma nirpekshata, it is pantha nirpekshata. Dharma nirpekshata means I don't have an identity, I am equally distant from different religious identities. Pantha nirpekshata means I have a religious identity, but I am equally distant from the Vaishnavite and the Shaivite. Secularism, when exported to Bharat, like every other European export to colonized societies, was meant to divide the society and to prepare it for ultimate conversion. Secularism is the intermediate step before you give up your religious identity altogether. And this is a documented, intended, let's say, strategy that they themselves say in their correspondence. Why is it that the definition of Europe of secularism in the mothership, which is Europe, allows them to retain their national religious identities, but when it is exposed to countries like Bharat, it results in countries like Bharat having to give up their civilizational identities and religious identities? Why? Which is why I use the words consciously, the myth of secularism, because what has been perpetrated on us is a mithya, which has got nothing to do with the original story of secularism in the mothership, namely Europe. So the next time someone says secularism means separation of the church from the state, please ask that blessed idiot to explain, why does it speak of church and the state? Why not any other institution? Why does this concept speak of the church? Because the history of secularism is the history of the church. Hence the words separation of the church and the state. Second, the other compromise that was struck between the rulers and the church as part of this principle was, since the territory of the church will be separate from the territory of the king in terms of the jurisdictions, the king shall never be allowed to appropriate property of the church. In this country, what it is translated to is the appropriation of temple property by the secular Indian state. So it was meant to ensure that the king shall never have the right to interfere with the financial independence and autonomy of the church. It has taken the exact opposite consequence in this country. For all practical purposes, we are glorified Macaulay Putras and Putris, who have zero understanding of how these concepts have devastated our society fully and entrenched unnecessary concepts in the heart of the society, hopefully not forever. And idiots on social media fight on saying, you are secular, I am pseudo-secular and ulta. Don't give up the concept altogether. Because secularism in its truest form and definition is incompatible with Hindu philosophy. It is incompatible with Hindu ethos. It is incompatible with Hindu administration. Because Hindu governance is based on the concept of Rita and Dharma. The king is seen as the torchbearer of Dharma. The king is effectively seen as the one who will advance the cause of Dharma. And Dharma can take a religious connotation, it can take a spiritual connotation, it can take a political connotation. So it can become Raja Dharma, or it can become even Sanatana Dharma. But Raja Dharma is also to be traced only from Sanatana Dharma. There is no way you can divorce or dissociate the two. When someone says that Bharat should embrace secularism, it effectively means Dharma's position in politics and policy making should be completely dislodged. Whereas every other country which subscribes to a particular religious identity gets to fashion its laws on the basis of its religious beliefs except us. So 52 countries with an Islamic identity can source their laws and their beliefs and policy from Sharia and the Quran. Christians can do that. You still have kingdoms, monarchs in Europe. Whereas we abolished princely states, completely insulted them by abolishing even privy purses, forced them to sell their property, forced them to rent out their ancestral lands. How many know that close to about 126 temples in Tanjavur are still controlled by the descendants of the Maratha Empire? There is a Bhosle who is still responsible for 126 temples in Tanjavur. He doesn't go around in a Benz, he goes around in a scooter. The head of such a great samsthanam goes around in a scooter. The Pandalam family a couple of generations ago had to work hard to make ends meet. And what are we constantly told about our princely states? That they were collaborators, that they managed to keep our way of life alive when they knew it was extremely difficult to defeat the British, because that was the largest colonizing empire ever known in history. So they did what they could to strike a compromise with him and still preserve our way of life and our institutions is lost on us. All of this because we have purchased distorted European ideals lock, stock and barrel without asking, is it relevant to me? Does it apply to me? What are its consequences for my identity? That's the fundamental question we should have asked. The unfortunate reality today is that even those institutions and organizations which are supposedly guardians of Hindutva and Hindu Dharma also swear by the very same devastating concepts without changing the definition or without asking whether it is applicable remotely or not. With no intention to embarrass anyone, my only suggestion is, when it comes to some of these issues, try not to get sucked into the social media battles of BJP versus Congress. Think for yourself. Because it's such a non-productive, useless conversation. Because it sets such a low bar for the conversation with no original thought possible. Because both sides agree on certain issues. They may only point out each other's hypocrisy, whereas I am basically saying we should not be accepting certain rules of the game which have been taken for granted. Instead of asking who is more secular, we should start asking why secular. Let's have an open debate on the subject. Why secular? What is its impact? And it extends to a host of other values. I am not here trying to take pot shots at any organization. I am only trying to say, since you have taken the interest and the initiative to attend a lecture on such a boring topic, I am assuming that you are open to slightly more different points of view than the standard Congress versus BJP trope. Because I am sick and tired of it. I am done with it. It is way past the sell-by date. We are consuming expired goods, which can lead to nothing good. So focus on three things. What is good for our civilization? What is good for that identity which informs the identity of the civilization? Who is doing a better job of protecting that particular identity? Are they doing it enough? Can we push them to do better? Those are the only questions which, according to me, are relevant. Everything else is hogwash. And everything else is white noise meant to keep you occupied and away from the actual problems. Sure, at the time of elections, at the time of hustings, we all have our choices. And there you never get to make an ideal choice. You're like bad, better, worst, or bad, better, worst. So that's the hierarchy of, let's say, virtue in this country at this point, politically speaking. So there you go for the least harmful option, in the hope that you can at least push them to do something. Because the other side has clearly said, I am here to destroy you, I'm going to adopt a scorched earth policy. Even that fellow doesn't realize that he is committing political suicide when there is an empty field open to protect Hindu identity openly. Right now, the political option of an unabashed, let's say, representative of Hindu security and Hindu interest is lying on the table like free money, unclaimed. But he is anyway given up because he is obviously controlled by external motivations and sources. So when you start discussing these concepts, for a moment, keep the political lens aside and focus on something deeper. And two, the purpose of introducing decolonization as part of our discourse is to question everything that we have taken for granted till date since 1835, when that blessed English education system was inserted into our consciousness to brainwash us over the years. You have to realize what they said when they introduced that system. Forget the so-called Macaulay dialogue that people keep quoting and citing. That's irrelevant. There's actually something deeper. They realized after multiple battles that the one aspect of Bharatiya society that they must not touch is religion. Because you can take over our resources, you can do whatever you want. The moment you touch religion, you will get a bloody nose. 1857 proved it even further. So between 1835 and 1857, they had multiple such experiences, and then they realized this community will resist immediate forced conversion because they've been fighting that brand of forced conversion for 800 years before that. So we have resisted the sword openly, so therefore we are comfortable picking up the sword to resist the sword. And therefore they start a slow poison, which will take effect over generations. Like time bombs that will explode, where Hindus themselves will stand outside universities protesting against CAA, against NRC, idiots of the first order. And that bomb is exploding almost 150 years after it was set in motion. You're trying to protect your present while your future is standing up against you. And when this happens, they are hoping, remain Hindus, but remain Hindus on paper only. Only for legal purposes you'll remain Hindu, because by the time you're out of this laundry, which I call the English education system, the Indian education system, we would have brainwashed you properly. Hindu, 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 weak Hindu, weak Hindu, weak Hindu. I am not a Hindu, I hate Hindu. Stages of conversion. So it's only a matter of time. And therefore, the word Hindu at this point, if I had to take a head count of practicing Hindus, we are not even 800 million according to me, because the test is how many of us would defend our religious institutions with conviction. And I wouldn't peg the number at more than 50% of 800 million, leaving us at only 40 crores. That's a very, I know, I understand it's a fairly alarming assessment, but based on my experience, I don't think the number is beyond 50% of the total number on paper. And when conversations happen about reclaiming our spaces, if the conversation had taken place in 1850s, there would be no room for negotiation or compromise. Today, the ones who are saying, give us all our occupied sites back, and this legislation that stands in the way of legitimate reclamation of occupied sites are being called extremists, not by others, but by Hindus themselves, proving that the education system has done its job. That the slow time bomb has clearly exploded properly. 40,000 sites at best is a number within the broken, truncated, moth-eaten Bharat that you see today. But if you start from Afghanistan till Bangladesh and you compare the total number of temples that have been destroyed, 40,000 is an underplayed number. Completely underplayed number. How many Jyotirlingas have been lost and how many Shaktipeeths have been lost is a simple calculation you start with, and then you look at every other temple possible. Mulastan becomes Multan, Ajmer becomes Ajmer. You have all these names, and still you think 40,000 is a huge number. It's such a huge number, it can come only from the mouth of a rabid Hindutva extremist such as Sai Deepak. Sorry, the reality is, despite going through the laundry, I have not been whitewashed yet. I have managed to retain the germ a bit more, for God knows for whatever reason. But you will realize as you read history that if there is a community that has allowed itself to be colonized over decades post-independence, the stellar textbook example will be that of the Hindu community. So what you have done in 1947 is given yourself a paper independence, which is why it is Swarajya, which is self-rule, but not Swatantra, which is ruled by your own principles. So today we are Swarajya, but we certainly are not Swatantra by any yardstick. Because you're ashamed of your policies, you're ashamed of your past, you don't have the guts to implement any of your political thoughts or your administrative thoughts in action. They're only relegated to ornamental speeches about how great we are and how we are the founders of democracy. That's it. And the one document that is constantly being cited against you to say that if you take such a position, you are taking an anti-constitutional position, therefore happens to be the Constitution itself. Hence, the efforts to understand, is the Constitution fundamentally pitted against my civilization? Or over the years, has it been interpreted in such a way that it appears pitted against my civilization? Is there a problem with Gangotri? Or is there a problem with Ganga flowing in Noida? By the time it passes through the plains, has it become dirty? So hence the attempt in whatever little I've written to understand how is this tension going to be understood, how is it going to be played out. Fortunately, I've stayed away from the political, let's say, noise as much as possible to focus on these questions, because remember, the other side operates in silence and they get the job done in silence. We believe in making a lot of political noise without undertaking policy changes. Politics is temporary, policy is long-term. If you believe that civilization is long-term, your investment therefore has to be in policy. And therefore the horse behind which the cart is placed has to be policy, and politics must be a driver of that particular policy. We actually place the cart before the horse. We will celebrate every municipal election. We will celebrate every panchayat election without asking, has it changed the status quo on education? Has it changed the status quo on our own children rebelling against our culture? Has it changed a situation where beef consumption becomes normalized across parts of the country? When generations of our ancestors fought to prevent it. And today you have a situation where you have an advertisement with a couple walking into a restaurant where beef consumption is shown with Tyagaraja Kriti being played in the background. Imagine if this could have happened 150 years ago. That is the story of so-called Hindu resistance and how we are an independent society. We are being told you are independent because we tell you you're independent, but you will still follow the rules that we set about 150 years ago. For all the rebels among youth, you want to break the rule? Break the colonial rule in your head. Thank you.
An hour of unblinked moments was a testimony to how profoundly inspiring and impactful Sai Deepak ji's words have been. I now invite Honorable Justice P. Krishna Bhatt to kindly come forward and provide a brief summary of the insightful talk we have just heard. Sir, we would be honored to hear your reflections on today's session.
Thank you, Sai, for the uncorking the myth of secularism and how it is foreign and something that is imported without paying customs duty. Now, the problem in the name of either the freedom of conscience or in the name of freedom of speech, free speech rights, the people who who set certain limits to the discourse are the biggest challenges to the constitution or constitutional values. Let me tell you briefly what is this problem about. You know, the easiest way to confine people's ability to think freely, is to limit the range of issues on which you can have a free play of exchange of opinions, ideas. Now, coming back to the context of the myth of secularism, as he rightly unraveled the whole thing, church versus state, and secularism is basically a smaller concept than what we had adopted all along as a civilizational value in this country, much smaller in its range or depth or in its implication. What is our actual concept? We have spoken about Ano Bhadra Kratavo Yantu Vishwataha. Let all noble thoughts come from all sides. We have no barriers. When the Parsis, one of the finest, you know, the people having their own set of faiths who came into India and assimilated in a very natural manner, when they set their foot in Gujarat, the king offered the leader of the Zoroastrian, the gentleman, a cup of milk full. He thereby indicating, we have so many faiths, we already absorbed so many faiths, and therefore we are too full. And if you come with a problem, and perhaps with the past experience, king was indicating, you will create more problems here. The gentleman, the Parsi Zoroastrian leader, he put one spoon of sugar into that, indicating that we will assimilate. Ours is an accepting, assimilating kind of civilization, and Parsis had never had any problem with our, way of life, and their way of life is not interfered. They are completely assured. Now, the biggest problem is any kind of debate. For example, I was a judge, as I was introduced. I was a judge. Supposing by following my faith, by being a judge, I don't lose my right as a citizen. I am a normal citizen. I enjoy the same right as you do. If you have the right to worship Ganapati, I have the right to worship Ganapati too. If you have the right to invite a gentleman, regardless of what post or position he is holding, to come and worship at my house, share that joy and fraternity. If you have the right, by being a judge, I don't forsake that right. I don't become a lesser citizen of this country. Now imagine what happened in the capital of our country, the kind of discourse, the limited discourse that was, that was set rolling. And the person who was holding a very high public position, like me as a judge, at a much higher level, he had invited another Indian citizen. Never mind, the person who was invited held an important post himself. How does it matter? How does it limit my, and thereby, because of the limited range of, limited spectrum of discussion that is made possible by those who set the discourse in India, the host was trolled so much, he had to feel diminished. He had to feel perhaps embarrassed to be an Indian, which perhaps would not have taken place in any other country. Diwali is celebrated in the White House, and everybody is invited regardless of their political philosophy or the position they hold in the establishment. Another example I am stating about this kind of wrong discourse that has been, set rolling in this country. A judge as you and me, he said, I prayed to God before I went to the court to decide a case, which even I do. God give me the strength to decide the case without passion, fervor, or any kind of favoritism. Now, instead of looking at the judgment as a legal document, which it is, and critiquing it for whatever it is worth, the debate that ensued within that narrow spectrum, because discourse is set, range for the discourse is set already by, I am not competent to comment on there. I am only talking about where we are heading in the name of the secularism, which was not in the original text of the Constitution. We had, even before the advent of the Constitution, it is not as if we have come into being as a civilization since 1947 or the year 1950, when the Constitution was adopted by ourselves, given to ourselves by ourselves. Why didn't we adopt US Constitution or the European, precedents or whatever? Why did we not adopt them? Why did we toil very hard for 300 days, or our Sai will tell you how many days our very eminent people, numbering about 300 people, debated, discussed, minus these fights and fisticuffs which you see, the subsequent heirs to that constitution who wield the power, instead of having power, the debates and discussions, sane debates and discussions, they indulge in fights and fisticuffs, which Walter Bagehot had warned, house is not meant for that. Now the limit to the discourse on what is secularism, even free speech and conscience, is set by certain people. Should we accept that? Is it our constitution? If it is our constitution, the Western concept of secularism is all about our constitutional values. Why did we have our own constitution? We could have accepted US constitution or the English constitution, lock, stock and barrel. We didn't do that. The reason being, ekam sat vipra bahudha vadanti. This is the Upanishadic injunction. Truth is one, but there are many ways. If you go to Belur Mutt, you will see Sri Ramakrishna holding his hand, and underneath there is a saying, as many faiths, so many paths. You have one God there, you can take different routes. This is all, samabhava or whatever is essentially about. We have this Raj Dharma. Why this was inserted when the constitution framers, the founding fathers did not feel it necessary. They did not feel it necessary because they had civilizational understanding. And as Sai properly put it, it was inserted into the constitution at the most unconstitutional era of our, independent Indian. I'll put it, I'm an old style man, I will say India. Okay, fine. It is Indus, drawn from that. Okay, I don't have to be very touchy about using that expression. In that very problematic era, when so many gentlemen, the older generation, including my own relatives, went into prison for no constitutional fault they had committed. They had done nothing against the Constitution. They had not committed any sedition. Sedition is an offense against the state, not against the government. Not against the government. There is a large distinction. You have every right to oppose the government, but not the state. You can't do subversive activities against the state, but you have every right to pull down the government. That is a constitutional right. This distinction was not realized in this era of everybody who could speak, who could set, good, healthy debate, who was put inside the jail. This word was inserted, and it is wholly un-Bharat, un-Indian. Ours is civilization. We believed in it. A lot of people came and assembled, and the one of the biggest problems I find is why we have lost China war. Why we can't take a stand on any major issues the moment such issues arise? Is it because of certain wrong notions that have been dinned into our ears and brain? Who are responsible for our getting political independence in 1947? Is it because we chanted certain 2-3 mantras, which is taught in our usual textbooks? British thought, no, now I am morally very much disturbed. They were bandits. Listen to Shashi Tharoor, no less. You listen to only spare 15 minutes. What kind of bandits and bandicoots they were? Did they have sudden overnight change in their mind, in their perception that we have committed sin and so we will quit? Somebody chants like, this Arabian Nights stories, whoever is acquainted in my childhood days, more than 55 years ago when I was going to school. This open sesame, somebody says, leader of a gang of thieves. Our leadership is something comparable. Look at what is happening in our assembly and all that. He chanted and it opened. So somebody chanted 2-3 mantras and British ran away. These kinds of myths are created, and one of such myths is this expression. It is to take away, sap our, confidence in ourselves, confidence in the value of our civilizational existence, and shorn of that, we can't be Indians. We can't hold our head high. And the Westerners are looking towards us, looking at us, looking at India, to seek some kind of solace and confidence. They have a better understanding. Sanskrit is marginalized here because it is not secular to study that. It is unsecular. If you study Sanskrit, you are unsecular. Setting this limited range for discourse. This is the most dangerous thing. Ladies and gentlemen, we should be asking questions now. Who brought independence to India? Who talks about Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, such a negligible person? Then why he got elected against the machination of two greatest leaders who claimed themselves as Democrats? Against the machination of that, Subhash Chandra Bose became president of the Congress and he had to quit in disgust. But he did not retreat like Purushottam Das Tandon, against whom also there was similar machination. He had to quit. And now there are people who claim this kind of legacy, that we have been Democrats, and people who try to analyze this myth of secularism, which is an imported thing, minus the custom duty. They are communal. This is a serious, we are at a serious era. We must start seriously asking questions about our existential, civilization issues. Minus civilization, we are none. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Honorable Justice P. Krishna Bhatt, sir, for your insightful words. I'm sure each one of you is carrying your own thoughts and reflections after this enlightening session. To make this interactive, we will be addressing a selection of questions out of 300 plus questions that we have received. As I call your name, please rise, and I will be honored to present your question to our esteemed guest, Sai Deepak. To begin with, the first question that we have selected is from Mr. Jobin Thomas. Jobin Thomas, if you're here, could you please raise? Okay.
I think they left after my opening session.
All right, sir. I will convey his question on his behalf. Jobin Thomas is an audiologist, and his question is, what exactly is democracy? Is it the representation of every ideology or the will of the majority?
So there's a very interesting discussion that happens across the world on why do you need to use the word republic in the context of a democracy? Why do you have democracy as well as republic? So I think there are three aspects to this. One, once you say it's a republic, you're trying to repel or dispel the notion that it is a monarchy. It's not. But the combination of a republican democracy effectively means democracy, which is the will of the majority, can lead to complete silencing of non-majoritarian voices or minority voices. So a republican democracy envisages a situation where the legislative body is not just populated by people in the majority, but it is equally populated by people in the minority, so that there is some kind of a pushback between the majority and minority, and it is not seen as a brutal rule by the majority or a brute rule of the majority. So, even I don't know how many chartered accountants are here, how many lawyers are chartered accountants. Anybody who runs a company or who understands how a company works knows that even in the Companies Act there are specific provisions that permit minority shareholders to approach the company law board or the company law tribunal alleging oppression and mismanagement of the minority by the majority. Which is to say, a democracy, if applied let's say in toto, as is veris, will have the effect of depriving any minority voice altogether. A republican democracy means that you make sure that the government is in the hands of the majority with a check and balance in the form of a minority which will stand in the opposition or sit in the opposition. So that is the meaning of a republican democracy. And the body in which this entire pushback plays itself out is the legislative body of the parliament. So hence, both typically are meant to go together. So it is possible for you to be democratic and still not be republican, and therefore be majoritarian, anti-minority altogether. And I don't use the word minority in a religious sense, because the parliament does not use, or rather the constitution does not use the word minority in a religious sense. If you take a look at Article 29, you can just Google it up, anybody can do it these days. It specifically speaks of cultural minorities, linguistic minorities, or any section of the society. So for all practical purposes, a Sanskrit speaking population could be treated as a minority for the purposes of Article 29. Or a Tulu speaking population in a non-Tulu majoritarian state could be treated as a minority for the purposes of that state. And majority and minority are never to be understood from a country perspective. There are judgments on the point, and the constitution also indicates that to some extent. Those are questions to be addressed from a state to state perspective. Because you could be a national minority and you could be a local majority, Kashmir being a very good example of it. Next.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Mr. Vinit Narayana Shastri M, who is a student. Welcome, Vinit Narayan Shastri. And his question to you is, he says, Namaste Sai Deepak ji. How do you see the next 30 years of this country, given the fact that demographic change is happening rapidly and there is also the illegal immigrants problem? Government is not doing anything about that.
I think what the government is or is not doing is a legitimate question to ask, and I won't run away from it. But before that, just consider this. Hindus are in trouble when they're in a minority. They're equally in trouble when they're in a majority. So which government can save you if you don't have the guts to save yourself? That problem is further complicated by the fact that your trouble is not a political incentive for any government, enough for them to act on it. The next 30 years, I think we are in 2025. I previously said that another quarter of a century could be problematic. In my recent engagements, I have advanced the timelines to say we are looking at a 10 or 15-year problem, not a 25, 30-year problem anymore. And which means if you see repeated instances of demographic imbalance, and you see someone constantly testing the waters to see what will the reaction be from the state. Let's test the waters. That means someone already knows that they have the numbers, plus the state does not have the will, nor the society has the will. I'm happy about rising awareness at least since 2014, or awareness which led to 2014 and thereafter. But it is translating at this point to an elitist awareness which does not have the will or the guts to do what it takes to get the job done, because it doesn't want to dirty its hands. And which means what will happen is you will continue to see lit fests flourishing. You'll continue to see more and more platforms discussing this. But will all of this translate to actual action is the question. If it remains a storm in a teacup, where people gather at a town hall or at a theater or a mega auditorium where they discuss all of this, then they are only reinforcing what they already know. What is the change that comes out of it? You may not know everything that I said today, but you broadly agree with what I've said. Broadly, if not in specific. So what is the change in the movement of the needle that I've achieved today? We are talking to each other and we already agree on quite a few things. How has this managed to bring about a change? Have we converted more people to our point of view? We are not sure of it. 2, will this lead to pressure on the government to act by way of resolutions to say that this audience believes that these are the following actionable points which you must implement in the interest of civilizational security? So one of the things that I've tried to convey in terms of a limited suggestion to multiple platforms is, it's good to organize events, but you must also have actionable goals where the voice of your audience is communicated to the government along with their positions. Lit fests must have clear plans as to what are the issues that we want the government to address. The other side does this brilliantly. They do it brilliantly. Every lit fest, every platform, every organization will have a certain set of intellectuals whose names and credentials are used to write letters, to write representations, to castigate people, to criticize stuff. We have not learned that yet. 2, here's my limited prediction or assessment of how this is going to play out. Because of a young demographic which is hungry for technology and growth, all things being equal and we don't get sucked into the race to the bottom called the reservation battle, our economic future is decent. Unless we go back to the freebie model, we go back to the hyper-reservation model and we kill everything that is possible. You can't speak of startups and competing with China in the same breath as reservations. I don't see how that works. Or at least unfettered reservations. Have some limits, respect the constitutional mandate of 50%, make sure that only the deserving community gets it, do away with the creamy layer. If you don't do that, this conversation is basically a conversation about India's doom. There is no way India will ever be a decent power to begin with. We are not even a middling power today. We are nowhere close to being a superpower. We are not even a developed economy. We are an aspiring developing economy which has been in this mode for the last 50, 60 years. Or maybe the last 20 years. Be realistic about where you stand. Because if you delude yourself that I've already reached a certain position, you will never reach there. Tell yourself that there's a long way to go. While this happens, even after the last 11 years since 2014, I have not seen a clear change in the DNA and the attitude of the Indian state in ruthlessly coming down on mischievous elements in the society. It still handles them with kid gloves. And it has no stomach for confrontation. It has a soft underbelly, which is constantly being punched. And it has happened over the last, I think, at least since 2019, we've been seeing the streets in constant action and a constant fire mode. So change the definition of terrorism from bomb blasts to urban warfare or street warfare, because that is what it has changed into. Because you don't know how to hit a mob, or you don't know how to deal with a mob, plus if it happens to have infants and women, that's it, God save us. Now we don't know which God that will be. So I don't see this as a particularly great period unless we change our approach and attitude. And we also develop the guts and the ability to articulate our position to detractors within and audiences outside. Have a very clear strategy of articulating your positions. Unfortunately, the last 11 years has been an example or a testament to a decent vision with average execution and terrible communication. That is not a recipe for a Vishwaguru at all under any circumstances. Address each of these aspects. We are not short on talent for this. There is a talent pool for this. And the problem is, if you choose to pass this problem as the problem to the next generation, with every successive generation, the pace of the problem and the magnitude of the problem is only increasing. And that is the problem that Indian democracy has been facing, that every generation believes that the next generation will handle, by which time the demographic imbalance only increases to your detriment. And previously it was some parts of the country, now it's all parts of the country. And we will still, again coming back to this issue, we will constantly blame someone who was a prime minister from 47 to 63 as opposed to focusing on what is happening now. There's a time when you must draw attention to yourself and what you have done. There's a point when constantly pointing fingers to the past doesn't help. So the most boring, obvious, bone-sickening question that we get asked these days in literary fests is, how do we change history textbooks? And then a host of opinions will start. The Marxists did this, the Marxists did that, Nehru did this, Nehru did that, his grandfather did this. You go on saying this for 10 minutes. It made sense to say this in 2014. Perhaps it made sense to say this in 2019. It certainly makes no sense to say this in 2024. They did what they did. What have you done? It doesn't help to constantly draw attention to them, because then it seems like you're the opposition in power and they're the opposition in power in both ways. Rather, it's almost as if you don't know who is setting the narrative, who's in the treasury bench and who's in the opposition. And at least over the last 5 years, the most serious challenge that's going to emerge for Hindu Dharma, Sanatana Dharma and civilization is not going to be external, it's going to be internal. Because we are going to be bogged down heavily on caste-related issues, in caste-related reservations, and that's going to be a serious problem, very serious problem, which will weaken us and hollow us out, leaving us completely defenseless to the external challenge. And on this, as long as the conversation is sugar-coated, it's politically correct, without truth being the basis, some form of reasonableness being the basis, it is a conversation that will be majoritarian in nature, which means whoever has the ability to create trouble on the streets will ask for reservation, and then we are again 10 steps back. So reservation is no more a question that is based on reality. It is not even based on perceived reality. It is based on distortion of history and gross lies. True instances of serious oppression or discrimination, address them. Do address them. Because if you don't, then that entire population remains vulnerable to conversions, to proselytization. I get all of that. But the way forward is to teach people to survive, as opposed to make them self-reliant, as opposed to making them state-reliant. And somewhere you have to say, is there a cutoff date for this? Is there a point where we can say, okay, after this, some may not necessarily be beneficiaries of this particular, let's say, benefit? If someone asks me, what is the cutoff date for your reclamation of temples or occupied sites? I say, you tell me the cutoff date for reservation, I'll tell you the cutoff date for this. Somehow cutoff date becomes relevant when it comes to reclamation of temples, but there is no cutoff date whatsoever on the question of reservation. At least my cutoff date is in the past. Yours is worst, it's in the future. We seem to have two different standards on the question of jati and on the question of inter-community relations. the logic of a position that applies to intra-community reservation in terms of trying to say that reservation must be there because it needs to address a social wrong in the past, or even perhaps a continuing social wrong in certain places, should equally apply to inter-community relations. The logic doesn't change because the overall issue is the same, addressing injustice, period. Why should the logic change? Next.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Sri Lakshmi, who is a law student. Welcome, Sri Lakshmi. So her question is, in Shabarimala judgment, it was stated that Hindus who worship women as goddess have sanctioned women on the matter of devotion. This observation is completely against all facts. So when Supreme Court makes such irrational observation as an educated Hindu, how I am supposed to react? Will I be subjected to contempt of court proceedings?
No. Criticism of a judgment is completely par for course. There's nothing wrong with it. There are judgments to the effect that you can even criticize a judge, not just the judgment. The Supreme Court has said as much. That not every criticism of a judge is necessarily contempt of court. But if the criticism is meant to prevent him from doing justice or to handle a matter, that is where contempt of court begins. However, if assume for a moment the conduct of a particular member of the bench leaves a lot to be desired, criticism is perfectly justified. There are multiple judgments on the subject. Two, one of the problems of this original Sabarimala judgment of 28th of September 2018 was that sweeping observations were made. Sweeping observations were made that Hindu Dharma does not permit this, does not permit that. Please realize Hindu Dharma is an agglomeration of sampradayas, and every sampradaya has its own sets of rules. So you don't get to judge the practices of the Kamakhya temple based on the practices of the Kanchi Kamakshi temple. You don't get to judge Tirupati on the anvils of Padmanabha Swami temple. Because they are different parts. Even in the tradition, they represent different parts of the Devi. They will have their own practices altogether. One may be left-handed, the other may be right-handed. One treats menstruation a certain way, the other treats menstruation a different way. You don't get to comment. Because the very same Hindu diversity that you constantly celebrate for the sake of ornamental argument is represented in the diversity of practices. You can't say Hinduism is a diverse set of traditions and then apply a blanket rule for all temples across the board. So those blanket observations in the judgment reflect an institutional misunderstanding or lack of understanding of the diversity and depth of Hindu Dharma, Sanatana Dharma. That is therefore, according to me, the highest possible level at which we need decolonization, mental decolonization, serious decolonization. That they look at the traditions of this land through the lens of a tourist. Because when you go to a zoo or when you go to a foreign land, you're looking at those people as curious onlookers. They are the subjects of your study. But when you look at your own culture like a tourist, there's a mental problem. It's like looking at your parents through the lens of a neighbor. Makes really no sense. So, according to me, mental decolonization is seriously important, and the best part is finally several voices on the bench of the Supreme Court have started saying we need to decolonize our approach to the Constitution, we need to decolonize our approach to the judiciary, we need to decolonize our approach to institutions of this land who are unfortunately litigants before our courts. So there is some hope for change, but the judiciary can never be faulted in isolation because the judiciary is a reflection of the society. It's not as if they have been parachuted from the heavens. They are from this society. And second, at least over the last 40 years, what has happened is, even if there is a diverse set of voices, some batting for the civilization within the constitution and some speaking against the civilization under the pretext of the constitution, certain set of voices have been constantly given prominence. So they are called the narrative, and the others who oppose them are called counter narrative. Who said you are allopathy and Ayurveda? Why is Ayurveda not the mainstream? Why is allopathy not the counter narrative? So I think the good part of what has happened in the last 11 years is that voices of dissent have started challenging the status quo. And which is perhaps the reason that by the time the Sabarimala matter went for a reference to a 9-judge bench, read the 9 questions that have been framed for reference to the 9-judge bench. It is a reflection of introspection by the highest court of the land, saying, maybe on matters of religion, we may not know enough. We may not understand enough. So it is not up to a secular constitutional court to distill what is an essential religious practice of a place, because you may not know enough to determine what is essential and what is not essential. Those are the 9 questions which were framed through the review petition, 55 review petitions that were filed against the original Sabarimala judgment, and the reference is awaiting. And those questions clearly show why the original judgment was sent to review. Today, the practice of Sabarimala as it existed prior to the September 2018 judgment has been restored because of this very order. So to answer your question, fortunately, that institution seems to be still open to introspection and a change of perception when presented with the right kind of push. The operative word being not right, but push. So, what this Sabarimala movement tells me from a larger perspective is, no constitutional battle is a pure legal battle. It is also being fought in the court of public opinion. You want the latest example? Places of Worship Act. These are battles which are also being fought in the court of public opinion. I am not saying public opinion must necessarily influence judicial outcome, because they must stick to the black letter of the law, the position on merits, and do justice to it. But the public should not believe that they have no voice in this entire situation. They do have a voice. On the issue of same-sex marriage, if all LGBTQ groups have a right to speak on the judgment and criticize it left, right, and center, on the question of Sabarimala, why should devotees not have the same rights? Why are certain rights limited to a certain section of people because you think that they're oppressed and not others? So, you're not wrong. And let's end it on a positive note, that the institution is introspecting. And I know for a fact, where I happen to appear along with 2 other senior delegates, one is Mr. Satish Parasaran and another Mr. Sridharan, to represent Ahobilam Mutt before the Supreme Court when the Telangana government tried to take it over, and the local high court rejected the takeover. The Supreme Court finally started asking the question, what is the job of a secular state in a religious institution? Who are you to administrate? Why do you take control? So the constant speech or constant discussion on the subject has finally percolated to the highest level possible, where they're also asking this question, how is it that we have allowed all these years where institutions, religious institutions of a particular community are being controlled by an apparently secular state? That question is now surfacing. So sometimes the first battle in court may not result in success, but you must keep taking a shot at that particular issue in that particular institution, because kabhi na kabhi to change hoga. You want a simpler example? The first judgment of the Delhi High Court on the question of Section 377 of the IPC was in favor of the LGBTQ community, to say that it should be decriminalized. When the matter goes to the Supreme Court, the first Supreme Court verdict was against the High Court judgment. Then when the matter was revisited, the opinion was changed. What happened in between? Advocacy by members of the community, trying to reach out to as many people as possible, presenting their point of view. I'm saying this is what the left does so well. For them, one defeat is not the end of the situation. They constantly attack, they constantly relentlessly pursue the cause, and they make sure that they publish articles, they publish books, they come out with videos. And they make sure that the thinking population has access to only their point of view through mainstream publications, which is what we need to learn. relentless advocacy. That is the only way this goes forward. Next. Please don't be under compulsion to clap at everything.
Since there are a lot of students, especially law students, we are giving this privilege of having the last question from yet another student. Her name is Madhura K. Do we have Madhura K here? Welcome, Madhura. Her question to you is, sir, what would be your advice to students to build a better India based upon truth, given that we see every democratic machinery is riddled with narratives against the interest of this nation?
The thing about too much exposure to information is also too much exposure to negativity. And especially information that comes through social media platforms. I can confidently say, having been in this battleground for the last 8 years, is despite all the challenges facing us, I am still an optimist. And I've seen perhaps terrible times on campuses when I was a student. I've lived through 98, the no confidence motion in 96. I've seen Kargil, I've seen 9/11, I've seen 26/11. I saw the results of 2004 and its repercussions on campuses. I've seen and I've lived through all of that. And I can say, any day today we are better off. Finally, we have a voice. These kind of platforms on such topics would have been unimaginable maybe even 5 or 10 years ago. This would be almost no-go. This would be considered harakiri for organizers. And today you're able to talk about these topics. You have an audience. So draw a leaf from X-Men. Mutants have finally found a place. And they're able to identify each other through social media platforms. And they're able to collaborate. A lot of my friends, I don't know them, not from Adam, but not from Manu. And I know them only through social media platforms because of a common bond, which is ideological or cultural or civilizational. So I had 2 students walk up to me recently at the Pragjyotishpur Lit Fest in Guwahati that was held just a few days ago. And both of them come from as left an institution as it gets. It's the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. And they are from, I think, the Guwahati campus. Both of them know that they don't subscribe to the leftist ideology, but they are stuck in a campus that is virulently left and virulently anti-non-left. And they were looking for people to bond and at least survive in that place. Somebody was wearing the thread and the other realized this was wearing a bindi. They identified each other. And they started talking to each other. And they realized, oh, you're also from the same camp, huh? Okay. We will talk. And that's how they started building a resistance on the campus. When the anti-CA protests were raging in TISS and similar institutions, I know for a fact the number of emails I got from those campuses, from students, telling me, sir, you continue the fight outside, we will continue the fight inside. With consequences for their careers and their futures, they took out pro-CAA protest marches on the campus of TISS Mumbai. So a lot of students are risking it, going out on a limb and defending their positions openly, finally. My reading is actually different. I don't think we have been in the minority. We have just been a non-vocal majority. So it's like this, out of 100 people, 30 people have been shouting. Their narrative has become the mainstream. 30 people know that they want to shout. 30 people don't know which way to go. 10 people don't care. So once from the outside, someone like me or Anand or Vikram or anybody else says, we are here, start the fight. Start the battle. We will protect you legally. We'll give you the arguments, but don't back down. Don't back down. They did it. And that results in the rest of the 30 people thinking, where should we go? Now, out of them, some people might not have an opinion because of lack of knowledge. You give them knowledge and then we'll see what will happen. Some people are opportunists. They'll see which way the wind is blowing. Aaj Congress, us din BJP, now we'll see. So they'll try and balance those positions. What has happened is this 30 now has a vocal 30 to oppose it. And there's a proper split in the remaining 40, meaning thereby that nobody gets to say that campuses will stay left like Indian roads. No. Keep left will be a rule only on Indian roads, not on campuses anymore. That we are very clear about. So my job has been to go to these institutions and say, let's start a small fire here. Narayana, Narayana, we'll do this and go. And I've done that successfully and very proudly in the most anti-Hindu institutions. Those who have cancelled me have done a great job of contributing to the myth of JSD. And they have in the process demonstrated and betrayed their anti-free speech credentials, making it easier for me to accuse them of being fascists. You let me in, you lose. You don't let me in, you will still lose. Choice is yours.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for addressing all the questions presented to you today in the most insightful and thoughtful manner one could ever do. We are almost at the end of today's program, and I kindly request everyone to remain seated until the conclusion. We will be closing with the playing of Vande Mataram, and it is essential that we all pay our tribute and respect during the moment. I urge you to stay until then and join us in this solemn gesture. Your cooperation is greatly appreciated. While we move on to the last segment of today's program, there's an announcement that I would like to do for the audience today. There's a book that has been released this morning with the title Samvidhana Badalai Siddu Yaru. Author is Vikas Kumar P. and it has been released this morning. This book is being sold today at this premises at the right entrance of Townhall. I urge you all to make a purchase of this book. The MRP being $299, today it is being sold at $200. I repeat, kindly support and buy the books today, which has been displayed at the entrance of Townhall. It has truly been a day to remember, one that will remain etched in our hearts for a lifetime. We sincerely hope that the Citizens Council continues to organize such impactful events in the future. As we bring this wonderful gathering to a close, I would like to invite Shri Vishwas US to deliver the word of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Namaste. As we draw this session, enlightening session, thought-provoking session to a close, it's my privilege to represent and deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of Citizens Council Chapter Mangaluru. This evening has been a beautiful amalgamation of wisdom, dialogue, and community spirit. It wouldn't have been possible without the collective efforts of individuals and different organizations. First and foremost, we express our deepest gratitude to Shri Sai Deepak ji, our distinguished speaker, for gracing the occasion with the presence and sharing his profound insights. Your clarity in navigating the complex interplay of civilization, constitution, secularism have truly enriched us all. Your thoughts will inspire us to think deeper, question narratives, strive toward more informed society. Thank you for sparing your valuable time for us today. We also extend our sincere thanks to Honorable Shri Justice P. Krishna Bhatt ji for your support and presence this evening. Your presence has been immense value to this event, and we are deeply honored by your encouragement and engagement. Thank you once again. A big thank you to all the members of the Citizen Council who have worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make this event a reality today. Your dedication and commitment in fostering meaningful discussions are truly commendable. To all our volunteers, your efforts in organizing the coordinating every detail has been indispensable. The evening would have not been possible without your hard work and passion. A special thank you to our host, Sri Raksha Bhatt, for curating this program in such elegance and warmth. Your seamless handling of this evening has brought a unique charm to this event. Thank you. We extend our gratitude to Pavitra Maya for starting this evening on a serene spiritual note with a beautiful prayer. Our heartfelt thanks goes to Mangalore City Corporation for the invaluable support in providing this wonderful venue. Your cooperation and assistance has been instrumental in making this event possible. We also thank Dev Sounds and Lights for the excellent acoustic arrangements. They have always been with us all through in our events. Finally, a big thank you to the present, to all the participants of the event this evening. Your enthusiasm and engagement make these gatherings truly meaningful. We hope to leave the insights that will spark conversations and actions beyond this event. Let us continue to come together as a community, question the narratives we encounter, and look forward for more aware and harmonious society. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you all. We'll be presenting the mementos now to J. Sai Deepak ji. The next memento will be presented to Honorable Judge P. Krishna Bhatt ji.
We have now come to the last part of our today's event, and I invite Srimati Pavitra Maya to come on stage, who is going to sing Vande Mataram for us today. I request all the audience to raise and join her. Thank you.
Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram, Sujalam, Sufalam, Malayaj Shitalam, Sasya Shamalam, Mataram, Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram, Shubha Josnam Pulakitayamini, Pullakusumita Dhrumadala Shobhini, Suhasini, सुमधुरभाषिणीं सुखदां वरदां मातरं वन्दे मातरम् कोटि कोटि कंठ कल कल निनाद कराले कोटि कोटि भुजैर्धृत कर करवाले के बोले मातुमी अबले बहुबलधारिणी नमामि तारिणीं रिपुदलवारिणीं मातरं वन्दे मातरम् तुमी विद्या तुमी धर्म तुमी हृदि तुमी मर्म तं हि प्राण शरीरे बाहुते तुमी मा शक्ति हृदये तुमी मा भक्ति तो मारै प्रतिमा गढ़ी मंदिरे मंदिरे वन्दे मातरम् त्वं हि दुर्गा दश प्रहरणधारिणी कमला कमलदल विहारिणी वाणी विद्यादायिनीं त्वां नमामि कमलाम् अमलाम् अतुलां सुजलां सुफलां मातरं वन्दे मातरम् श्यामलां सरलां सुष्मितां भूषितां धरणीं भरणीं मातरं वन्दे मातरम् वन्दे मातरम् वन्दे मातरम् आ, 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 आ,
I request the committee members of Citizens Council